freaking 11:30 p.m. and it is basically a cage for someone who doesn't know how to navigate railings. And someone approaches you from outside that cage, what are your options here? What do you do?
Welcome to the Desk to Defender podcast. Desk to Defender is a project for personal and communal defense. It is our hope to inspire all people, from all backgrounds, to bolster their own defense in these trying times. With our manual and this podcast, we want to get you from out in front of the desk and into the front lines of this resistance.
All right, everybody. Well, I'm here today with Brandi Laird, who is the founder and inspiration and creator of Citizen Operating System. Right? Did I get that? Citizens Operating System.
Yes, it's a mouthful, and I realize that. Citizen Operating Systems. If you'd like, you can just say Citizen Ops or COS.
Awesome. Yeah, in fact, I have it written down right in front of me just so I wouldn't butcher it, and I did butcher it. So
it's really fine. I do too. It's my signing into anything is a nightmare.
Yeah, I bet. Well, what I'd love to do is let's just jump right into this, and I'd like for you, basically, if you could do just kind of give a brief introduction of Citizen Operating Systems, kind of what it's about, and then if you could then follow that up with kind of an origin story, kind of where your story, what inspired you to start it, and where you began.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just do that. So I am Brandi Laird, and Citizen Operating Systems started as just a personal project of mine. This is kind of going to mix in with the origin story. So forgive me if I kind of just jump right into the other aspect of it. Is for the last 14 years or so, my primary vocation has been to teach parkour, which we'll get to that in a second. But alongside that, and again, getting into the history of parkour in a moment, there's a lot of aspects of utility in the mindset, at least the mindset I've always approached that discipline, whether I'm teaching it or practicing it or what have you. And essentially, over time, I've embraced what used to be more of what I call my secret skills, or kind of quieter hobbies where, people would see me or know me for parkour, teaching parkour or practicing it or what have you, being a leader in that community, and not so much see this stuff on the side or the things that I'm thinking. And over enough time and enough friends telling me to share my thoughts and my hacks, as it were, for utility and for just enhancing living and awareness of various types of lifestyles. I guess the lifestyle I live is a very, very aware one, I would say. Like literally aware. Like I'm noticing where things are, this and that, avoiding hyper awareness, all this. And yeah, so I just started that as the Citizen Operating Systems, where I can make posts about whatever thoughts or tool or idea or what have you, that I was working with all the time, that my friends thought were cool and that I thought was cool, that probably other people might like as well and benefit from. And that has grown from that to a new direction, especially with this pandemic, and pretty much not the full obliteration of, but a very deep wound to the parkour instruction industry specifically, what with not having group classes, and it's just the fitness industry, right, with any sort of indoor facilities, had a big hit. Between that and just being ready to move on to my next or my additional things, because when I get into something, I tend to do it 100%. I'm very known for all of my resources are being poured into whatever it is I'm focusing on, which is why I became the instructor that I've become over this time. Those of you who don't know parkour, and even people who are in parkour, especially the newer practitioners, they don't know who I am because I'm known for instructing people, right? So you have to go to the people who are spreading this and thinking the thoughts around how we can keep it a longevity on the larger scale, and also make it legitimate on a larger scale. So going into, I don't know how you want to go into the parkour definition,
Yeah,
or if you
yeah,
want to move
definitely.
there right now.
Let's jump into that. I think it's a good transition there, because I'm not terribly familiar with parkour outside of actually just following your YouTube page, and to be honest, and I think my introduction to parkour, and I hope I'm not speaking for the rest of America, but it was I think one of the James Bond movies.
Okay, that's one of them, either that or The Office. And that's just how it is.
Sure.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that one? Parkour.
No.
Oh my gosh, you should be thankful.
Okay.
But also I'm thankful for that scene, because honestly, they didn't do a bad job with their definition. It was just all the goofy shenanigans around it. So which started this whole, it blew up the word parkour, at least, onto the larger scale, and it hasn't, the shadow of that episode has never left us since.
Well, I've certainly seen the meme for it, I think.
Like parkour, exactly, where people jump, and so you'll be out there training, and you could do something simple like a jump, really, and actually, and again, I'm thankful for it, even though it can be annoying. I've embraced it over the years, because it's gone from someone seeing you having to see you do a backflip to say, oh, parkour, to knowing that if you're just kind of standing on a railing, you might be practicing parkour. So what is this mystical parkour word thing? Well, nowadays that term is actually it's an umbrella term, and I'm going to say it's an umbrella term for a lot of various approaches to obstacle-based movement, which again is very broad. That can be an obstacle-based movement. That's any kind of obstacle coursing. That's going to be parkour, free running. I would say Ninja Warrior is obstacle-based, right? Your Spartan races that have become really popular in the last decade, we'll say, is obstacle-based. So if you just ask any old person, hey, what do you think parkour is? It's any range of things. When it was termed parkour, it was a specific thing, and that was a discipline of movement where you are training your body and your mind to be able to overcome obstacles. The idea was, if you had to get somewhere, do something, go somewhere, nothing is going to stop you, no obstacle, whether it's a wall or your own fear, endurance, your ability to keep going, pretty much anything. And parkour itself was derived of, well, there's a really, I think it's a lovely story. Now I'm pretty connected to the story after having thought about it and told it for so many years. But parkour, before it was parkour, was l'art de déplacement, which is the art of displacement. So this is what these kids essentially called their game or their discipline, where they would go out and try their feats of strength and courage. It wasn't just haphazard. It wasn't just like, oh, hey, can you just jump off the highest thing? It's like, no, we want to be able to be strong enough to jump from this wall to that wall, across this spooky gap. We don't know any technique. We don't know any better. So we probably should just get really, really strong first, because at least if we're super strong, whatever happens when we get there, we'll be sturdy enough to take it on and receive it. So what they would do is they would just train their bodies ridiculously hard, like push-ups for literally days and hours until they can't do anything else, until they felt strong enough and resilient enough, and go on these runs all night and work on their balance and work on their trust with each other and all these things. And they go out and try these maneuvers, because now you can look up parkour on YouTube or tutorial, even like, hey, how do I learn X move? There's a name for moves, and a coach like me can stand up and like, hey, first you do this, then you do this, make sure you don't do this. These guys had to figure that out. So some of the earliest videos you can find, it looks terrible. It looks like it hurts. Like, it looks really not that graceful for the most part, especially at first, because they are just getting strong and hucking themselves at things and learning about this. And the reason they were doing it was to escape the other aspects of what their lives contained. These were all children of immigrants to France. So it started outside of Paris, in the suburbs of Paris, in Nice and Evry in France. And so they're all, they all have different languages. French is their second language, at least, for all of them. Their options can be gang violence and shenanigans and, all of the other stuff, or they can go and make themselves stronger and resist that. And this is all because they had some influences, and those influences were the father of one of them. David Bell is often known for being the founder of parkour. He wasn't alone. It was a group of friends and cousins. So his father, Raymond Bell, was a firefighter in the French military, and at the time he would practice gymnastics and something called the natural method, or method naturelle. Have you ever heard of that? That's like the heart of parkour. Okay, so this is where I learned. When I learned about parkour, this was still kind of common knowledge to people who were learning about parkour, because it was still early enough where it was still very attached to what parkour means. So the natural method was derived from a guy named Georges Herbert. Phenomenal dude. This guy was an officer in the French Navy. We're talking 1900s. He worked real hard. He was an officer, retired, and then went about to travel the world. In his travels, he noticed a few things about the populations of the world. Places where he was from, people were considered more primitive, tended to be in much better health and shape. These people could move their bodies even when they got older. They had good dental hygiene. They had good mental hygiene, right? And so he started noticing, hey, what's the difference between my supposedly developed Western civilization and these, apparent savages, and why are our people getting all, crotchety and small and sickly, and these folks aren't? And go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, there's finish your thing, because I have a good parallel to this. That is really interesting.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm almost finished with this. It is nice to lay this groundwork. It does feel like a bit of a chore sometimes, but George Herbert was amazing. So along with these sorts of observations he made, he ended up being, and I always do bad to remember the details of this situation, but he was in the right place or the wrong place at the right time to help evacuate some 700 people during a volcanic eruption. So he's like trying to, manage this extreme emergency situation, moving people from here to there. And then after this whole endeavor, he comes out with this idea, hey, everyone, aesthetics are cool, and exercising to look good and be sexy is great. But, if you can't do things, if you can't be useful, if you can't get yourself from point A to point B, protect your family, protect yourself, keep your life going, what's it even for? So the method naturelle, or natural method, is comprised of 10 ideas for exercise and other principles for training, where you're going to see movements: walking, running, crawling, so walking on all fours, climbing, jumping, balance, lifting things, carrying things, throwing things, self-defense, swimming. So this is all his ideas, and along with that comes altruism, right? We're doing this so that we can help other people. We want to do this for longevity. I'm not doing it just for some spectacle. I'm doing it as long as I humanly possibly can. So from that base, the first law de déplacement, parkour, free running, what do you want to call it, was derived. And now, present day, we have some people still practice art of displacement, so they call it ADD for short. Some people call their practice parkour, some people call it free running. There's some distinctions between parkour and free running. If someone says, hey, I'm a free runner, it's very likely that they're doing more acrobatics than not, versus someone who says parkour probably aren't doing so many acrobatics. So there's nuances within that. And definitely not across the board are people coming at it from this same philosophical base. But this is where I'm coming from with my practice, all for this time, which is why Citizen Operating Systems is the project that it is. It's just an extension of these ideas, where you have to be X to be useful. There's a statement where, from natural method, you have to be strong to be useful. And I pose that you can be so many other things to be useful, right? Especially in this current age. So you can be intelligent to be useful. You can be compassionate to be useful, or present, right? You can just be around, be willing to do an action to be useful. So it's all based in utility.
It's amazing. I had no idea it had a root like that. It seems like it very similar in that same time frame with a lot of people who had kind of seen the rise of the Industrial Revolution, through the kind of the beginnings of the Gilded Age. They started seeing the kind of the weakness in society from exactly what you had describing with George Orwell. And the founder of Outward Bound was very similar in that regard. He saw these kids as just kind of weak, and they had no focus, they have no ability to craft anymore, to create. And he used instead of parkour, he used like what we would call high ropes courses or obstacle courses, and he'd really kind of put these kids into I guess potential danger. I mean, he would like hardcore stuff, like he'd throw them out in the River Thames and like make them tread water for hours, to strengthen them up, where there were real consequences to those actions.
Right. Yeah, I don't know too much about that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. He had said, I remember there's one of my favorite stories of Kurt Hahn, and his school was a very wealthy school, like princes and industries, captains of industry and stuff, where the kids were in that school, and they were running a track meet against a poor neighboring town or whatever, and the kids are all lined up ready to run the race, and Kurt Hahn had made his boys take their shoes off, and they got pissed. And they're like, "Well, we're not going to win if we take our shoes off." And he said, "Well, I'm not teaching you, how to win. I'm teaching you through running." And it was the idea, and that through that action, I'm going to teach you this code of ethics, the things that you need. And that's I see a lot of parallel between that and parkour, which I would never have known. I just kind of know it as backflips and jumping around.
Yeah, which is reasonable, because I would say for most people now, that is what it is. Because again, as someone, I've instructed people long enough that when I got them at first, they were children, and now they're full adults. So there's been a lot of time passed since you had to seek out these little clips on the internet and download them to watch them, and try to mimic what you see from these wacky guys in France, to Hollywood style tutorials from free runners who make their living doing stunts. It's a very different approach for most people. However, for me, this is what I care about the most, right? And there are still a lot of practitioners who do know about this history and stick to it, and or if you do have a good practice, if you have what I would items to which I would consider a complete practice, a lot of this stuff is going to happen anyway, right? You are going to develop spiritually and emotionally and all these things. It's a transformative discipline. And like you were saying with this, sorry, would you say it was
Outward Bound? Yeah.
Outward Bound. So similar to this, although perhaps less extreme in most of our cases, not so much for the original guys. It could be anything, it could be boxing. It could be playing instruments, right? It's a means to an end. In this case, it's a means to an end that happens to be applicable to anywhere, anytime, because it has to do with your environment itself, moving your body in that environment, and knowing, getting really intimately familiar with your options as you develop more of them.
Sure.
Which is where the self-defense comes in.
And is parkour, I mean, I think we always think of parkour as something very specific to cities, in particular larger cities, but it's something that can be adapted to a small town or even the woods, right?
Yeah, parkour is an idea. It's an idea. It's a concept. It's the idea of, again, what is my body capable of? What is the need? Like, what is my need for moving? Am I going to the kitchen to open the fridge, or am I needing to get out of a burning building? As the classic example. And then how can I do this better? So I will often describe this to folks too, especially the kind of people who are like, well, I'm too old to start parkour, or I'm not in shape enough to start doing this. It's like, no. It's literally the difference between taking 7 steps to get to the kitchen or taking 5 steps. You just stretch out your stride a bit. Perhaps you do, minor differences, minor changes that make big differences, right? So, it saves you X amount of steps over time. It's a really trivial example, but it's an example that is how at least I conceptualize the idea of parkour. It's when you understand your body and you understand the options that you have in relation to obstacles and to space, you get to decide. You just have more opportunity to say, I will take the easier route or the shorter route or the more fun route or this or that, the other thing. Or I can, right? So the one I think about a lot is being backed up against a rail or something. For most people, if you get backed up against a railing and someone's like, pressing on you or whether it's still at a distance or not, you might not feel like you have too many options. But if I am super familiar with railings and I feel comfortable with whatever's on the other side of this thing, even if I take a quick look, or if I don't, I'm going to have at least one more option, right? Whether it's something I'm going to take, that's another story. But the point is to have options.
And so it really is kind of, and well, I want to lead this into self-defense, but in many ways, it's a way in which you become so intimate with not only your abilities, but also your environment that you can use that and manipulate that to your advantage, essentially. So you kind of mold yourself to the environment and move throughout it, correct? Is that right?
That is right. And I do want to make sure that this is also explicit, is that that is correct. And in a lot of practice, it can be a little bit skewed, right? Because certain obstacles are more fun or more cool. Like it's more fun to go out and do this powerful feeling vaulting movement over and over on this thing versus running from point A to point B and seeing how swift I can be. So again, based on your intent and based on the approach, it's one thing or another. In the application of self-defense and practicing it as a practice of egress, you could say, then yes, you're absolutely correct. It's like you move through, nothing stops. Whatever is in front of you, you adapt to, not because you've been there before, not even because you've seen the exact obstacle before, but because you've trained yourself in so many different ways, and you can just adapt on the fly to what's happening to keep yourself going.
This is kind of when you talk about the optimization of flight, and this is what you're talking about essentially. Is that right then?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Precisely.
So can we talk a little bit more about that, kind of tease that out a little bit? Because I think that's pretty interesting.
Hi, listeners. I want to take a quick break from our podcast to remind you that the Desk to Defender project relies on contributions and donations made by our listeners and supporters. We hope that you are learning a lot about building solidarity and defending your communities through our discussion. If you are enjoying this podcast, we ask you please to consider subscribing and visiting our website. For any of you with means, please also consider becoming a patron through our Patreon account. Thank you, and enjoy this podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Disclaimer: it's this is still a new, I guess, science for me as well, and I'm not the only one doing it. There's fewer of us who care about this sort of thing from the parkour community. I would say, at least fewer vocal ones. Perhaps there's more than I know of who are just keeping to themselves. So I do have to shout out, a colleague and friend of mine. He runs Base Fitness out of Indiana, USA, and so he mixes combatives, mostly hand-to-hand combatives and grappling with parkour education. So because it is a martial art to us, parkour is the flight of fight or flight. Everyone who knows anything about tactics knows that retreat is a perfectly viable and at times necessary tactic. And there's this idea in the world of self-defense, we can even say the industry of self-defense, of where you have your self-defense student, they're learning your kicks and punches or whatever you're giving them. And at times, whether it's at the start or throughout, you tell them, remember though, if you can, like when you get away, run away. Like as soon as you can, run, right? Obviously, if you can avoid it, but we're in the situation, if you can get away, run. And so few, especially in comparison to how many of those entities exist, so few are actually taking the time out to have people practice the running away part. I think back to a Krav Maga class I took. I did this one of those deals where you can pay just so much and get unlimited classes for a week. And so I doubled up and I just try to get as many of their classes as possible. And in a couple of those classes, we did a hammer fist, hammer fist, boom, run. But only to the door. right? Only to the door. And in one of these cases, I did vault a wall because it made sense at the time. And I got there first before everyone else. Some fellow felt inspired and the turn after mine, and he tried it, he failed, he flopped, he got there last. So they kind of have like a start, right? You have this idea, or you might think about the gauntlets that you might go through in various self-defense classes where you're supposed to, push through from station A where they're pummeling you and you do X amount of, X technique, and then you run through to the next thing and they're pushing you, et cetera. So there might be some movement, but it's not the same as, you are at the ATM for whatever reason, you decided to go to the ATM at, freaking 11:30 p.m. And it is basically a cage for someone who doesn't know how to navigate railings. And someone approaches you from outside that cage, what are your options here? What do you do? Right? What on one side of this the rail, there's a nice flower bush, it's beautiful, and also probably slippery as all get out, unknown, who knows what's in there. Other side, there's concrete, right? And so like this, even the skill to assess this, to be aware of this, that itself is a skill that needs to be educated for someone who wants to learn to think that way. And so that's really all a part of the idea of practical parkour applications and parkour for flight, for self-defense practice.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, because I always think that or at least I write about a lot on situational awareness and developing situational awareness, and how if you can become more situationally aware, you don't have to resort to using your means, whether it be hand-to-hand combat or a weapon, to defend yourself. And I think that next step, that natural step, that fight or flight, we have, the kind of machismo aspect of self-defense culture these days really focuses on that, on just that fighting, and doesn't talk enough about, well, how do you avoid fighting, or or even talking about verbal judo, and how do you disarm somebody in an argument instead of escalate it,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm all over that too. I mean, we're speaking specifically about the runaway part, but if you have been following me, and I know about you too, that we'd much rather not deal with it. I'm pretty lazy at heart. Like, if I don't have to deal with a conflict, and that I'm just a human. Most humans don't want to deal with conflict, and so having our preemptive skills on lock is more important than anything else. This is just that when you get to this, are you actually ready? So some other things I was thinking about as you were talking that people don't think about ahead of time, or that might surprise them, which might also seem kind of obvious to others, is things like, the shoes you're choosing to wear. A lot of people have to dress up all fancy pants. I cannot imagine wanting, it would be terrible to have to run away in those very nice leather soled shoes. Nice pointy leather soled shoes. We have a little room in the toe on a wet concrete day, right? So just thinking about being aware of the limitations of your equipment, being your clothing and your body itself, in a different way than maybe you're used to.
Yeah.
Because anyone can think about running away when you're like, oh, it'll be flat land, it'll be simple, I just sprint, or I zigzag, or whatever. It's like, no. What if there's people and you're on a crowded sidewalk? You just got out of an elevator and there's a bunch of people waiting to get into it, right? Just having contingency plans for common situations, just like you might for like your groin kicks and your eye gouges and these types of things.
Yeah, I love this. This is great. Before we run out of time, because I want to make sure we have enough time to hit a couple things. But one, your I don't know what you call it, tagline or slogan on the website is, and YouTube says that Citizen Operating Systems aims to encourage civic responsibility, create investment in challenging diseases of civilization, and empowering extraordinary action by ordinary citizens. I love that.
Thanks.
It's but I would love to talk a little bit about the diseases of civilization, what you mean by that.
Sure, yeah. I'm happy to talk about that. And that's not a term that I came up with. That is a term that I gathered over time and reading various things for basically all of the ills that have befallen us as a result of agriculture and industry. So things like obesity, depression, malnutrition, if you are getting all kinds of food, like these sorts of things. Actually, right now, you could argue that the addiction to screen time is also a disease of civilization, right? So this is all I mean. I don't know about that specifically, but I was thinking video games and scrolling, TikToking. Right. I dumped hours the other night just scrolling. I do it too, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm not immune to these diseases. I just think that there's a lot of ways we can address this, right? So things like diet is a good one. For me, I'm a mover, right? I like to see people move and keep their body strong and moving things around inside, because that's also going to help you be less stagnant. So here we go. I actually just popped it up on PubMed, where you pop in diseases of civilization in the old PubMed, and it just lists things like cancer, diabetes, obesity, implication of milk, et cetera, et cetera. So there's studies out there too of like, what is it we're eating in our diets? What are these things that are causing all these issues that, again, we didn't have before we were quote unquote so civilized, and that those people who are still not quote unquote civilized don't have to this day.
Yeah.
So basically, get outside, move your body, have fun and play around when you can. Eat good food, these sorts of things. It's not super complicated. It's just, approaching people in a way that they believe that they can actually do something for themselves around it.
Yeah. I think sometimes people forget about how new some of these challenges are to our civilization. Modern agriculture has only been around for 250 years, but industrial agriculture, only really since late 40s, 50s, and talking about kids not having much to do in France, and the concept of the adolescence has only been around since like the 70s. So there's all these new challenges as civilization has developed, and we developed very quickly. And I think that kind of goes back to the parkour metaphor. It's being able to be adaptable.
And there's also something too about the parkour as well, because you have to embrace yourself as a creature. You have to embrace, at least at some level, yourself as an animal to succeed at parkour. Right? You have X amount of limbs that you have, and you don't even have to have 4 limbs necessarily, right? If you can move, you can learn to move better. That's what I believe. So when you're doing this, you're also reconnecting to a primal aspect of yourself, which again helps combat that whatever civilization is doing to us at any given time. And so you're saying, can this be done in the natural environment? Is parkour this? Yes. I mean, we see all the images of it being in the urban space, but parkour is just another name to call something we've always done, right? Jackie Chan was doing this before it was called parkour. People were doing it before Jackie Chan. There's a video, I think it was from the 1920s or 30s, of a fellow climbing walls with this little kid on his back as a spectacle, right? So this is not new stuff. It's just renamed or given additional names, but it's just all versions of reclaiming our primal selves to stay connected to that, so we don't get lost in this new modern era. And that's what I believe personally is also why the things like the Spartan races have gotten so popular as well, and even Ninja Warrior, which has spawned a whole new industry of its own. I think that's just because of the desire to be these creatures that do move and in some way, shape, or form. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's engaging in a very free and creative way too, which I think is also kind of going back to that outlet of being able to craft and create. You can do that through your body as a means, which is pretty cool.
Yes, and it leaves no trace either. It's untraceable, at least ideally, or it can be. So that adds another layer to it as well. Just like any martial art, right?
Yeah.
Like performing your katas or what have you. So
what about empowering extraordinary action? I mean, what does that mean to you, and why is that important? And well,
that's a fun one, because
powerful.
I think so too, but it's only as powerful as where you're at, right? So for example, an extraordinary action in one culture is not extraordinary in another. So me standing up on the train in New York City, spouting my ideas is not an extraordinary action in New York City. If I go to, say, Saudi Arabia and I try the same thing, that would be an extraordinary action, right? Now, whether good or bad, it'd be extraordinary. So this is sort of an open blanket statement of the idea of wherever you're at, whoever you are, whatever is possible for you where you are, go that next level, just the next one up. So something as simple as being the person to actually stop and help someone else push their car. And in this society, for where I'm at, that still is an extraordinary action. It might seem small, might seem really easy, but as far as like the culture of where I'm at is concerned, that still is extraordinary, and it's very helpful to that other person. We are going to assume these actions are for the positive or good of others, because you can do extraordinary bad actions too. These are not the ones that I'm encouraging.
Yeah.
So that's really what that means. It's just, go the next level. Another example is, again, very, very trivial example is, there's this is years ago. There's an older lady who had a cart, little groceries cart, and one of the wheels was all busted, and she was trying to drag this through this gravel path through the park. And I stopped. I talked to her. I was like, "Hey, can I help you?" She's like, "Oh, I'm just going to the bus stop on the other side." I was like, "Let me help you." So I carried this cart, which happened to be full of wine bottles. So not the lightest of tasks, but simple. And also, I'm like, "Yeah, this is fun. Like a little bonus exercise, whatever." And she was just like, "I can't believe you're doing this." I just carried to the other side. She gets to the bus, and I'm not gonna help her further than that because I also have things to do. But it was one little extraordinary moment that meant this lady didn't have to drag her cart through the gravel, taken probably 3 times longer than she would have otherwise, and than I would have, right? So it's stuff like this. But it can also extend further, right? Say you really want to affect things and get into policy. Well, by golly, go into policy, right? Maybe that's your extraordinary action, or maybe it's to start a foundation or to teach somebody something. There's no, basically, if it's going to be better for other people. Do you know meliorism? Are you familiar with that term?
No.
That word? Meliorism. It's a belief that we can affect our reality for the better. There's a lot more to it, which we don't have time to go into, but that would be one of the closer ways to describe all this whole idea behind COS and what I'm talking about here is just we can make things better, even if there's all kinds of stuff outside of our control that is definitely making it harder to exist and making it harder to live harmoniously. We can still affect that, and we just have to do it by making small actions all the time, small extraordinary actions.
That's awesome, because I think that's a lot to the core of what the Desk to Defender project is about, is pushing people to get them to the next level of we'll call it self-sufficiency or ability to kind of take care of oneself and one's family, one's neighborhood. And right now we see that we are in kind of an extraordinary time in many ways.
Yes.
And there are a lot of individuals, a lot of people, a lot of communities right now in specifically in danger. And that's kind of where this project had been designed or set up, is to help individuals find that kind of not just the skill set, but the encouragement and the community that's needed to help.
That's awesome.
In individuals' protection, or individuals fight for their own life. Really, not to be too melodramatic. Sometimes I like to do that.
I mean, let's be honest with what we're talking about here. I'm in that realm too. It's like it's been light and conceptual so far, but it also is life or death. Absolutely. Which is why it frustrates me so much that people aren't practicing certain things. And it frustrates me when I can't do certain things, right? Which is why it drives me to train and to improve and all this. So I'm with that. That's really cool.
Yeah, awesome. Well, before we end it, I would love to, if there's anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to discuss, but certainly I would like to kind of challenge you with this, to kind of some parting words or encouragement for listeners that are in a place where they feel like they want to begin to learn about either defending themselves or standing up for themselves, their community, their their existence, kind of where to start, where to begin, where would you suggest somebody to find that source of empowerment?
Great. That's a great question. And absolutely the first place to start is knowing your values. If you are at all unsure about what you value, what you care about, if you don't have it, if you've never written it down, if you've never sat down to think, what do I care about most? That is the place to start. You have to know your motivations, your own motivation. You have to know your own reasons why. If that's already easy for you and you're like, yeah, wow, simple, done that, been there, like what's next? You have to start developing then your main components of I think of it as a weapon, because you are the weapon, right? I am the weapon. My brain, my thoughts that I think, the knowledge that I have, the experiences that I've cataloged, and that I have reactions that can draw upon. That's part of my weaponry, part of my arsenal. My body itself is part of my arsenal, right? And actually my ability to communicate is an arsenal too. You talked before about de-escalation, this and that. So the next, and that's actually probably the easiest one to start practicing, and also the hardest one to get good at. So the first and next thing is your preemptive skills, including de-escalation skills, communicating with people, communicating with types of people who you don't have a good communication style with, where y'all just butt heads, it doesn't mesh. Learning how to still communicate with those people. That's one of the most powerful things you can learn. And again, you don't need to take classes. You don't need to pay anything. You can actually just practice on the internet. Go onto the internet and see if you can mediate a conversation with other people. See what happens, right? See if you can just have a conversation, make comments, and not be activated or heated when someone says something, right? You can practice these skills literally all the time, being cool-headed and discerning in your communication. Get on some sort of exercise. Very simple. If you don't have any ability, if you're like, oh, I'm not strong at anything, I can't do anything. That's not true at all. First of all, again, if you can move better. So something simple, exercise. Maybe it's holding a plank 30 seconds a day. Couple squats here and there. I'm not gonna go into there's so many options that it doesn't even make sense for me to go into it. However, choose something small, attainable, that you're willing to do, and stick to it. Be consistent. If that is, again, 30 seconds plank hold, 5 squats, and a 20-second hang a day, do it. Because if you do that every other day for 2 weeks, you're going to start feeling stronger, guaranteed. You just have to be consistent. And then, of course, we talked about the mind. You have to sharpen your mind. So keep studying, read up. A lot of things. If you have access to the internet, as you do, since you can listen to this podcast, study. There's so many. YouTube Academy, first of all, Wikipedia. I don't care where you get it. Be discerning, right? Get this, find information about the same thing from different sources to pit them against each other. But you have to learn more what's out there. There's so many security videos, right? Sure. That's the whole thing people share. So, but it has to start with what you care about. You can't move forward unless you know what you're willing to do, and why you're willing to do it.
And if you happen to live in the Seattle area, you can come to you for help, right?
Yeah, you could just contact me. That's fine. You can come to me. I'll help you out.
So you do the parkour, and then you have the Stop the Bleed class. And what else do you do for training?
Yeah, so the Stop the Bleed, just for that is, by the way, that's donation based. So that's always going to be free if you want it to be, because I just care about that. And then the other thing is the Fight or Flight Club. So that basically is the practical parkour and whatever self-defense skills. What you're going to see from me is a lot of what you'll see from other people, right? Do the most damage as quickly as possible as far as the combative stuff goes. But yeah, that's something to schedule with me for sure, which can be done via email. All of the stuff is on the Citizen Operating Systems .co website, or Instagram, or YouTube. Actually, that would be the main thing is please subscribe to YouTube. I would like to build that up eventually. So
it's a great channel.
That's great.
For those that
thank you.
Familiar with it. It's always fun to watch you. And I'm always, and on Instagram, when you go live, I'm always curious to see what's going to happen.
Thank you. I know I'm all over the place, and I try to be consistent about being all over the place, but I don't know. I second guess myself a lot. Like, is this cool enough? Does anyone care about this? These are the questions I ask myself. But we're working through it.
Everyone who creates content does, yeah, for sure. But you're doing a great job. We really appreciate what you're doing out there for sure. And
I thank you.
I absolutely appreciate the time that you spent here with me talking, and this has been great. I really hope some of our listeners are going to be jumping on YouTube and subscribing and getting involved.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you again, and stay safe out there, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Cheers, y'all.
Thank you for listening to this podcast of Desk to Defender. If you'd like more, please give us a follow and share this podcast with your friends and comrades. We'll be back soon with another episode of Desk to Defender.